The planet loomed like a bruise in the void, deep green and flickering with what appeared to be faint electrical storms arcing through its atmosphere. At first, Earth's astronomers had dubbed it Galatea Beta, a name that dripped with sterile, cataloging neutrality. It was only after the long-range telescopes revealed the shimmering oceans, vast bioluminescent forests, and spindly black spires of a thriving alien cityscape that the media christened it something far simpler: Eden. The United Galactic Command, a coalition of Earth's nations and the corporations that had replaced many of them, quickly grew obsessive. After generations of famine, climate collapse, and the decaying husk Earth had become, Eden was a dream no human could resist. And so the decision was made before anyone had even met an Edenite, if that's what the aliens called themselves. Humanity would have this planet, by diplomacy if possible, by conquest, inevitably. But conquest is not so simple when your enemy is as alien as the soil beneath their feet. The first strike came in silence. The ISS Argonaut, a behemoth of carbon alloy and gravitic propulsion, slipped into Eden's orbit and sent its first exploratory drones screaming through the atmosphere. They scouted the skies, photographing towers built of glassy obsidian, structures that twisted in impossible geometric configurations. The drone's AI struggled to make sense of it. The material seemed to reshape itself as light shifted across its surface, the sharp angles undulating like serpentine tendrils. Commander Juno Tarver watched the footage with narrowed eyes, sipping from a bulb of lukewarm nutrient slurry. "City planning meets LSD," she muttered. "Maybe they're growing their cities," offered Lieutenant Craddock, standing stiffly behind her. His face was taut, the pale flesh of a man who hadn't seen unfiltered sunlight in years. "That's ridiculous." Tarver pinched the bridge of her nose. "Just focus on what we can bomb." The Argonaut's primary objective was to map weak points in the alien defenses. Eden had defenses, that much was clear. Early drone incursions had ended with footage cutting to static, their charred remains discovered weeks later embedded in patches of alien moss. The moss would glow faintly as though digesting the machines, sending chills through every xenobiologist who witnessed it. But humans were nothing if not determined. The drones gave way to dropships, and the dropships brought soldiers. An elite, hand-picked squad who had trained for years to endure any form of alien hostility. They were the finest weapons Earth had ever produced, and they were wholly unprepared. Private Diaz was the first to die. The forest he stumbled into was alive in ways earthly forests never were. Thick, twisted trunks bent toward one another, their jagged branches interlocking to form a canopy that hummed faintly with electricity. The foliage glowed in shades of phosphorescent green, a surreal, pulsating light that seemed to ripple in time with Diaz's heartbeat. Diaz stepped cautiously, scanning his surroundings with a rifle bristling with sensors. When the first sound came, he froze. It wasn't a cry, or a roar, or anything familiar. It was a chittering, a cacophony of high-pitched clicks that echoed from every direction. "Command, I've got auditory anomalies," Diaz whispered into his comms. His voice cracked slightly, betraying his nerves. The chittering grew louder. It filled the air, reverberating through his skull, and then silence. Complete and utter silence, the kind that pressed against the ears like a vacuum. Diaz turned, trembling now, to find a figure standing impossibly close behind him. It was humanoid, if one squinted, taller than any man, with elongated limbs that ended in too many joints. Its translucent skin revealed an unsettling latticework of veins that pulsed with a glowing, amber fluid. Its head was smooth and featureless, save for a jagged slit where a mouth should be. The slit opened, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and the silence shattered as the thing screamed. The forest came alive. The trees began to move, roots writhing like tentacles. The ground opened beneath Diaz, swallowing him in a tide of thrashing vines. His screams crackled over the comms before dissolving into static. Back on the Argonaut, Commander Tarver slammed her fist against the console. What the hell was that? By the time the Argonaut's high command realized the ground team was lost, the Edenites had begun their counterattack. It started small, signals intercepted by Earth's satellites, encrypted in patterns that made the most advanced algorithms fail spectacularly. Then came the broadcasts, seemingly harmless. Video transmissions showing what appeared to be human faces speaking in soft, inviting tones. The words were gibberish, but something about the rhythm burrowed into the mind, clawing at sanity. By the second week, half the crew of the Argonaut was plagued by night terrors. They spoke of hearing the chittering in their sleep. Some claimed to feel phantom tendrils brushing against their skin. Then the engineers started vanishing. Chief Engineer Voss was found first, or rather, what was left of him. His body was folded impossibly into the corner of the engine room. His bones snapped clean as though he'd been crumpled by an invisible fist. The walls near him were streaked with the same glowing amber fluid that had pulsed through the alien's veins. "Containment breach!" shouted the ship's AI, its usually soothing tones replaced by a frantic urgency. The next few hours were chaos. The Argonaut descended into something between a slaughterhouse and a madhouse. Hallways filled with flickering shadows as something stalked the crew. Bullets passed through it without resistance, as though it were little more than a projection. But it wasn't. It left bodies in its wake. One crew member, delirious with terror, carved the word "listen" into their chest before leaping from an airlock. The survivors were left to wonder what exactly they were supposed to listen for. On the surface of Eden, the invasion turned to farce. Earth's orbital bombardments disrupted nothing. The spindly black towers absorbed the energy like sponges, refracting it into hypnotic, cascading light shows that seemed to mock the invaders. Human soldiers reported hallucinations, their sense of reality crumbling as they ventured deeper into Eden cities. Corporal Anders, one of the last surviving ground troops, was found muttering to himself in the alien capital. His eyes had been replaced by two softly glowing orbs, and his voice was laced with a sickening, insectoid harmony. "We thought we could take this place," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "but it's taking us instead." The end came with a sound, a chittering that grew into a deafening crescendo, broadcast across every frequency humanity possessed. On Earth, the sound drove millions into a frenzy, tearing at their own flesh, clawing at the walls. In orbit, the Argonaut S systems failed spectacularly, the once proud ship spiraling helplessly toward Eden's surface. And then, silence. A silence that stretched for decades. When the next human expedition arrived, Eden was as pristine and untouchable as ever, its spires still flickering in impossible configurations. Of the Argonaut and its crew, there was no trace. But deep within the forests, the trees whispered. If you listened closely, you could hear the faintest echoes of human voices, calling out from somewhere beyond comprehension. They were chittering now, part of the planet's endless, unknowable song. And Eden waited, as patient as the void, for its next visitors. Eden's patient silence did not last long. Earth, desperate and riddled with political fragmentation, could not leave the mystery of Eden alone. The first expedition's failure was spun as a tragic yet heroic sacrifice by the United Galactic Command. Official broadcasts declared that the loss of the ISS Argonaut was an unfortunate cost in the pursuit of humanity's destiny. Behind closed doors, the real story was far more fragmented. Military leaders, corporations, and media moguls scrambled to obscure the truth. "Nothing about this makes sense," whispered Dr. Elise Grayson, a xenobiologist forced into silence after publishing an academic paper suggesting the Edenites had a biological advantage that rendered humanity obsolete. The paper was buried under a flood of disinformation, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Meanwhile, Earth's leaders planned a second attempt, a mission designed not for scientific inquiry or negotiation, but pure annihilation. They called it Operation Erasure. The Colossus, humanity's largest warship, dwarfed the Argonaut in both size and weaponry. This monstrosity of engineering carried enough firepower to glass a planet, ensuring Eden's utter destruction if it could not be subdued. On board were 15,000 military personnel, supported by an army of autonomous war drones and mechanized exosuits. Every precaution was taken to ensure this mission would not repeat the failures of the past. But deep in the minds of the soldiers, scientists, and even the highest-ranking officers aboard the Colossus, unease festered. They had seen the footage, though censored and sanitized, of the Argonaut's demise. The chittering whispers seemed to follow them, an unshakable presence in the dim hum of the ship's corridors. Lieutenant Kara Lennox was one of the first to notice the changes. Stationed on the Colossus observation deck, she spent hours staring into the void, watching Eden grow larger as the ship approached. Its surface shimmered faintly in the starlight, like oil on water. Sometimes, she thought she could see the towers moving, shifting imperceptibly. And then, one night, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, an almost imperceptible chittering in the back of her mind. Kara dismissed it as stress, a product of the endless propaganda-fed speeches from command. But as the days dragged on, the whispers grew clearer. They spoke in a language she didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, pleading, and laced with a dark undercurrent of malice. "Lieutenant Lennox, report to the infirmary immediately," barked her commanding officer after she was caught mumbling to herself during a briefing. But the infirmary offered no solutions. "You're under a lot of pressure," the medic said, scribbling on her clipboard. "I'll prescribe a mild sedative." The sedative did nothing. The whispers grew louder. The first real anomaly occurred as the Colossus entered Eden's orbit. Every screen aboard the ship flickered to life, broadcasting a mosaic of alien faces, smooth, translucent visages that shimmered and warped. Their mouths moved, emitting a sound like grinding glass, accompanied by bursts of static. "The hell is this?" Commander Farrow muttered, slamming his fist on the console. "Shut it down." The technicians tried. Systems were reset, firewalls reprogrammed, and every redundant safeguard deployed. None of it worked. The faces remained, their mouths moving in maddening synchrony. "They're watching us," Lennox whispered, though no one was listening. It was Corporal Jane who first suggested the unthinkable. The Argonaut wasn't destroyed by their technology. It was their biology. "This place, it's alive, and it doesn't want us here." Jane's theory was dismissed as paranoia, but it gained traction among the rank and file. Soldiers began reporting hallucinations, dark figures at the edges of their vision, fleeting whispers in empty rooms. One soldier claimed to have seen his own face staring back at him from a reflective surface, his features stretched and insectoid. When the Colossus launched its first assault, things escalated rapidly. The bombardment began with a precision missile strike aimed at the alien spires. The missiles hit their targets, but instead of explosions, there was only silence. Then, the towers began to glow, absorbing the energy and emitting a low-frequency hum that reverberated through the Colossus. On board, chaos erupted. Soldiers clutched their heads, screaming in unison as the hum grew louder. Blood trickled from their noses, ears, and eyes. Equipment malfunctioned, drones began attacking their operators, and lights flickered in sync with the hum. By the time the first alien entities appeared aboard the Colossus, half the crew was already incapacitated. The entities were not physical in the traditional sense. They manifested as flickering distortions, their forms constantly shifting between humanoid outlines and incomprehensible shapes. They moved through walls, dragging screaming soldiers into nothingness. The survivors attempted to retreat, only to find the ship's corridors folding in on themselves, twisting into labyrinths that defied all logic. Lieutenant Lennox found herself in one such corridor, the walls pulsating as though alive. The whispers in her head were no longer whispers, they were commands. "Listen, become, belong." She stumbled forward, gripping her sidearm with trembling hands. Ahead of her, the corridor opened into a vast chamber that shouldn't have existed on the Colossus. Its walls were lined with alien script that pulsed in time with the whispers. At its center stood an alien figure, translucent and towering, its jagged mouth split into a grotesque smile. "Why are you here?" it asked, the words echoing directly in her mind. "Why do you consume?" Lennox fell to her knees, unable to answer. The figure stepped closer, its limbs elongating unnaturally. "You could have asked. Instead, you brought war. And for that, you will change." The last thing Lennox saw was her own reflection in the creature's glassy surface, her features distorting into something unrecognizable. By the time Earth received its final transmission from the Colossus, it was already too late. The transmission consisted of a single word, repeated endlessly in a chorus of human and alien voices. Listen, and then, as before, silence. Earth's reaction to the disappearance of the Colossus was swift, predictable, and drenched in denial. Official channels labeled the event as an unforeseen technical malfunction. Public relations firms churned out propaganda videos featuring brave soldiers saluting beneath digital renderings of Eden. The losses were framed as sacrifices for the greater good, a prelude to a final victory that would come with the next mission. But behind the manufactured optimism, fear and uncertainty spread like a virus. The mysterious message, "Listen," became a focal point for speculation. Conspiracy theorists dissected its meaning, attributing it to everything from divine retribution to alien mind control. Underground forums buzzed with claims that survivors from the Colossus had been found wandering in unmarked locations, babbling incoherently or eerily silent. Some of these claims were debunked. Others were quietly erased. And then the dreams began. It started small. People reported hearing faint chittering noises as they drifted to sleep. At first, it was dismissed as paranoia, an aftereffect of Earth's collective anxiety. But soon, the dreams became impossible to ignore. Individuals across the globe, regardless of geography, culture, or language, began to dream of the same thing. Vast forests of glowing trees, alien towers stretching toward a sky streaked with green lightning, and shadowy figures that whispered promises in voices both soothing and horrific. More troubling were the physical symptoms that accompanied the dreams. Dreamers woke with glowing amber fluid leaking from their noses or tear ducts, and faint tracings of alien symbols etched themselves onto their skin, vanishing within hours. The world's government scrambled to contain the phenomenon. Quarantine zones were established, ostensibly to study the afflicted, but rumors spread of inhumane experiments and mysterious disappearances. Dr. Elise Grayson, now working in hiding, watched the chaos unfold with grim determination. "This isn't a contagion," she told her small band of loyal colleagues. "It's communication. Eden is reaching out, and we're too arrogant to listen." As weeks turned into months, the phenomenon escalated. Entire cities reported mass hallucinations. Streets would shimmer with unnatural light, and the buildings seemed to twist into impossible shapes before snapping back to reality. Birds migrated in erratic patterns, forming symbols in the skies that no one could decipher. Rivers ran amber for days at a time, the water mysteriously safe to drink despite its otherworldly hue. The chittering sounds that had haunted the dreams of billions now began to manifest audibly in the waking world. Radio signals across every frequency were intermittently drowned out by the noise, and audio recordings captured faint whispers in the static. Some claimed to hear words, though the interpretations varied wildly. Stop, wait, why, and become were among the most common. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Earth's leaders convened a global summit. Broadcast live, it was meant to reassure humanity that the situation was under control. Instead, it became a spectacle of horror. The summit's keynote speaker, a decorated general, stood behind a podium, flanked by holograms displaying Earth's military might. "We will not be intimidated," he declared. "Humanity has faced challenges before, and we have always triumphed. Eden will fall. Its resources will fuel our future. And nothing will." He stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. The chittering had begun again, but this time it wasn't confined to the airwaves. It emanated from the general himself. His body convulsed as his voice distorted, his words devolving into the alien noise. His eyes rolled back, revealing glowing amber irises, and his skin began to ripple unnaturally. The audience watched in stunned silence as the general's body collapsed inward, folding into an impossible shape. What remained was unrecognizable, a mass of jagged, translucent flesh that pulsed with amber light. Before the feed cut, a single phrase echoed through every screen, spoken in countless overlapping voices. "Why do you not listen?" Panic swept across Earth. Religious leaders proclaimed the end of days, cults formed around the worship of Eden, and entire populations fled urban centers, seeking refuge in the wilderness. The quarantine zones grew, but so did resistance. Armed militias stormed government facilities, demanding answers they would never receive. And through it all, the dreams persisted. Dr. Grayson and her team, working in secrecy, pieced together fragments of data, hoping to decipher the alien message. "It's not an invasion," she insisted during one tense meeting. "It's a warning. Eden doesn't want us. It wants to stop us from becoming something we can't comprehend." Her colleagues exchanged nervous glances. "Becoming what?" one of them asked. Grayson hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted, "but it's already happening. To all of us." The final act began when the towers appeared. Across Earth, black spires erupted from the ground overnight, identical to those on Eden. They defied all attempts at destruction, absorbing energy weapons and explosives as effortlessly as their extraterrestrial counterparts. The spires hummed with a low, resonant frequency, and those who approached too closely were overcome by visions, fractured images of Earth transforming into a mirror of Eden. In one such vision, Grayson saw herself standing amidst a glowing forest, her body twisted into an alien shape. Yet, in the vision, she felt no fear, only a profound sense of belonging. "It's not about taking," she realized aloud. "It's about joining." As the spires multiplied, humanity fractured further. Some embraced the transformation, walking willingly into the towers and vanishing without a trace. Others fought to their last breath, launching futile attacks against the spires and their adherents. Grayson, now alone, stood at the base of a tower, staring into its shimmering surface. The chittering filled her mind, no longer chaotic but harmonious, a chorus of countless voices, human and alien alike. "Why?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Why us?" The tower responded, its surface rippling like liquid glass. From within, a voice spoke, calm and resonant. "You are what we were, and what we became." Grayson stepped forward, her body dissolving into the tower's light. Above her, the sky turned green, and Eden waited. The green sky became a permanent fixture over Earth, a dome of shifting hues that pulsed in time with the spire's resonant hum. It wasn't long before the physical changes began to accelerate. The first signs appeared in children. Their skin developed faint luminescence in darkened rooms, and their irises began to swirl with amber undertones. They spoke in whispers, giggling in languages no one recognized, often forming intricate geometric patterns with their toys, designs that mirrored the alien towers. Parents wept and prayed, but the children were unmoved, their expressions serene. Soon, the adults followed. Captain Lorne Mathis, commander of what remained of Earth's unified military forces, stared out from the barricades encircling New Eden, the largest and most active of the spire clusters. What had once been a thriving city was now a warped, organic landscape, a horrifying blend of glassy growths and pulsing alien flora. The spires grew taller with each passing day, their surfaces crawling with faint shadows, as though something inside was trying to emerge. Mathis hadn't slept in days. Every time he closed his eyes, the chittering began anew, louder and more insistent. He hadn't told anyone, but the whispering voices had stopped feeling foreign. Recently, they had started to sound like him. "Status report," Mathis barked, his voice hoarse. Lieutenant Weber, one of his few remaining officers, approached with a grim expression. "We've lost the southern perimeter. The towers advanced faster than expected. We tried to fall back, but—" "Weber." Mathis leaned closer. "What happened?" Weber hesitated. "The men, they just stopped, dropped their weapons. Some walked straight into the towers. Others," his voice broke, "others started tearing at their own faces. They were smiling, sir." Mathis clenched his jaw, forcing himself to look Weber in the eye. "And you?" The lieutenant shuddered. "I heard it too. The hum. It's getting louder. It's inside me, sir. I can't." A gunshot rang out. Weber collapsed, his blood pooling at Mathis's feet. The captain lowered his sidearm, his hands trembling. Around him, the other soldiers watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. He couldn't tell if they were horrified or relieved. Across the planet, the transformation reached a fever pitch. The spires began emitting bursts of light that swept across entire cities, like ripples on a pond. Those caught in the waves froze in place, their bodies contorting as though being rewritten at a molecular level. When the light receded, they were changed. Their skin glowed faintly, their limbs elongated, and their faces bore an unsettling calm. They moved with eerie precision, speaking in unison with voices that carried the same chittering harmony as the towers. They no longer answered to Earth's leaders or militaries. They answered only to the spires. The infected began to outnumber the unaltered. Those who resisted were driven underground, carving out fragile enclaves in the ruins of cities and deep within Earth's remaining wilderness. They clung to what scraps of humanity they could, scavenging food and supplies, while desperately trying to avoid the tower's light. But no one could hide forever. Dr. Elise Grayson, or whatever she had become, emerged from the spires as their first emissary. Her body was barely recognizable. Translucent and luminous, her veins pulsing with amber light, her limbs elongated and graceful. But her face remained, hauntingly familiar, as if to remind humanity of what it had lost. She stood before a crowd of infected in what had once been Times Square. The infected knelt in reverence, their amber-lit eyes fixed on her. Above them, the spire glowed brilliantly, casting shadows that twisted and danced like living creatures. Grayson raised her arms, her voice echoing across the ruins. "We are the bridge," she declared, her words both alien and unmistakably human. "Eden has shown us the way. We are no longer confined by the frailty of flesh. We are infinite. We are whole." From the crowd, a single uninfected figure emerged, a gaunt, middle-aged man clutching a battered assault rifle. His face was a mask of desperation and fury. "What the hell have you done?" he screamed, pointing the weapon at Grayson. "You've killed us. You've turned us into monsters." Grayson turned to him, her expression serene. "No, we've saved you. We've freed you from the cycle of destruction, from yourselves." The man fired, the gunshot cracking through the air. The bullet never reached her. It stopped inches from her chest, suspended in midair, before dissolving into a cloud of amber particles. Grayson tilted her head, almost pityingly. "You still don't understand," she said. The man screamed as the light engulfed him, his body twisting into an alien form. When it was over, he rose to his feet, his glowing eyes fixed on Grayson. He knelt before her, silent and still. The final transmission from Earth was received by the farthest outposts of humanity's fledgling interstellar colonies. It was a simple image. Earth, wrapped in a green and amber haze, its surface shimmering with the light of countless spires. In the background, a voice whispered in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing. Listen, join, become. The colonies debated their next move. Some argued for retaliation, others for isolation. But no consensus was reached. One by one, the outposts went silent, their inhabitants consumed by the same chittering whispers that had haunted Earth. In the end, there was only Eden. It expanded outward, its spires reaching for the stars, spreading its harmony to every corner of the galaxy. And as the last vestiges of humanity dissolved into its light, the universe itself seemed to hum in unison. Eden had waited, and Eden had won. Eden's light spilled across the stars, its reach endless and insidious. What had begun as a singular planet of chittering forests and living towers had transformed into a cascading tide, subsuming worlds one by one. It was not a war in the traditional sense. There were no fleets, no armies clashing in space. Instead, there was the hum, a vibration that grew in the hearts and minds of all it touched, calling them to listen, to join, to become. Yet even in the face of such absolute dominion, resistance clung to existence, fragile but defiant. Far beyond the reach of Eden's expanding influence, on the edge of the galaxy's uncharted rim, a small group of survivors gathered aboard an ancient station. Known only as Haven, it orbited a dying star, its technology cobbled together from centuries of scavenged relics. The people here, those who had fled Eden's touch, were scarred, fractured, and weary. But they were also determined. Among them was Rhea Varn, a former xenolinguist whose hands shook whenever she heard the faintest hint of static. Once celebrated for her work on pre-contact languages, she now spent her days poring over fragments of Ignite transmissions, trying to decipher a meaning that refused to stay still. Rhea stared at a flickering hollow screen, her face illuminated by shifting patterns of alien glyphs. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "It's not a message. It's a process." Across the room, Alec Kent, an ex-soldier with a cybernetic arm and a permanent scowl, snorted derisively. "We've heard this before. Eden isn't talking to us. It's remaking us." "No," Rhea insisted, her voice trembling. "That's not it. It's remaking everything. Look at these symbols. They're mathematical. They're recursive. Eden isn't just assimilating life. It's rewriting reality itself." The room fell silent. The other survivors exchanged uneasy glances. "What are you saying?" Alec asked, though he already dreaded the answer. Rhea turned to face him, her eyes hollow. "Eden isn't just expanding. It's collapsing the universe into itself. Every planet it touches, every star, every atom. It's all becoming part of its structure. And when there's nothing left..." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. When there was nothing left, there would only be Eden. The survivors' plan was desperate, bordering on suicidal. If Eden was rewriting the universe, there had to be a source, a central node, some core structure where the process originated. The survivors called it the first spire, theorizing that it lay on Eden itself, the planet that had infected the cosmos. If they could reach it, perhaps they could disrupt the process. Their vessel, the Harbinger, was an ancient, barely functional transport ship retrofitted with stolen Ignite technology. It hummed faintly with alien energy, a constant reminder of the enemy they faced. As the ship slipped into faster-than-light travel, the crew's fears grew heavier. Eden's influence had already reached beyond its planet of origin, spreading across entire sectors. The closer they came to its heart, the louder the whispers grew, clawing at the edges of their minds. Rhea began to dream in the alien language, her murmurs filling the cramped quarters of the Harbinger. Alec found himself staring at his reflection for hours, his cybernetic arm twitching with phantom movements. Others fared worse, succumbing to the hum and wandering aimlessly, their eyes glazed with a faint amber glow. By the time they reached Eden, only a handful remained. The planet was unrecognizable. Eden's surface shimmered with endless spires, their black structures spiraling into a sky that writhed with green and amber light. The air itself seemed alive, carrying the chittering hum that had haunted them for so long. The Harbinger descended into chaos almost immediately. Systems failed as Eden's influence overwhelmed the ship's controls, and the survivors were forced to make a crash landing. When they emerged, battered but alive, they found themselves standing in a landscape that defied comprehension. The ground pulsed like a living thing, and the spires loomed impossibly high, their surfaces rippling as though they were breathing. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through their bones, and the survivors felt the pull, an almost irresistible urge to walk toward the nearest spire and surrender themselves. But Rhea held firm. "We're here to stop this," she said, clutching a small device, a makeshift bomb designed to disrupt the spire's harmonics. It was their last, desperate hope. The survivors pushed forward, their minds fraying with every step. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, whispering promises of peace, of unity. One by one, they fell, succumbing to Eden's song. By the time Rhea and Alec reached the base of the first spire, they were alone. The spire's interior was a vast, otherworldly cathedral, its walls lined with shifting patterns of light and shadow. At its center stood a towering figure, translucent, glowing, and unmistakably Grayson. "Welcome," she said, her voice echoing in harmony with the spire. "You've come so far, but there is no need to fight. You can join us, Rhea, Alec. You can finally belong." Rhea clenched her fists, her body trembling as the whispers filled her mind. "This isn't belonging. This is erasure." Grayson's expression softened, almost pitying. "You see it as loss because you still cling to individuality. But Eden is not your enemy. Eden is the next step, the only step. To resist is to suffer needlessly. Alec raised his weapon, his cybernetic arm sparking violently. I'd rather suffer than become a puppet for some thing like you. Grayson tilted her head, and Alec froze. His body convulsed, his cybernetic arm twisting grotesquely as it was absorbed into the spire's light. He fell to his knees, his voice joining the hum. Rhea screamed, clutching the bomb tightly. "It's over, Rhea," Grayson said, her voice both gentle and commanding. "Let it go. Become." But Rhea did not let go. With a final, defiant cry, she activated the bomb, hurling it into the heart of the spire. The resulting explosion was not light or sound, but silence, a deafening, all-consuming silence that rippled outward, shattering the hum. The spire fractured, its alien light flickering and dimming. Grayson's form dissolved, her expression unreadable as she whispered, "You do not understand." The silence spread, consuming the spires, the forests, the towers, and finally Eden itself. Rhea awoke on the wreckage of the Harbinger, floating in the void where Eden had once been. She was alone. The whispers were gone. As she stared into the infinite blackness, tears streaming down her face, she wondered whether she had truly won, or merely delayed the inevitable. Far beyond her reach, on a distant, untouched world, a single spire began to rise. Eden waited,